I want to take a few minutes reflecting on what we have achieved and what it actually means. So it's less technical this time. We have a few outputs that directly is derived from the technical validation that Andrea just described, so from the lexicon and the terminology that we have developed. This is something that we shouldn't really underestimate. It's very important, because I remember still we had a lot of discussions what it all means, like what's a walking bar, what's a step, a stride, and so on, right? So we had to agree on it, right? Otherwise there will be a crash in outer space. Methodology for the device selection, data quality, and so on. I don't want to go through all of those, really. I want to focus on these 4 outcomes, and that's data and software. I mean, that's not the only outcome of the technical validation, but I think it's really very important. So we have mobility algorithm implementation in yellow, that the software that we have generated, the algorithm implementations, originally in MATLAB, still kind of in MATLAB, but being now implemented in Python as a reusable package, and that is available on GitHub now as we speak. It's not complete, it's still under development, but it's also available under a fairly permissive license, even for commercial use, because we want tech companies, to use that stuff, right, to build it into their systems. And on the right, the box next to it, the benchmarking, validation, implementation framework, I think that was, Andrea referred to it as the statistic analysis. That's the software framework that takes the algorithms from the different sensors, including the reference and the data, and compares it. So comparing what comes out of the algorithms with the target sensor on the lower back, comparing it to the reference, and tells you how good or bad the estimate for walking speed and so on is. So that software pipeline is also available under the same license. And then we have the data from 120 participants in the 6 cohorts, and that's raw data, like 100 hertz data, for those of you who want to deal with that amount of data. But also the derived data from the DMOs. And that's for all the sensors, including the reference, the video system, the in-depth system that Andrea mentioned. That data is available via the Zenodo platform in June, from June on, under a slightly more restrictive license, so you can't sell this data. I mean, I think that makes sense. And last but not least, a really important outcome is also the data standardization that Andrea mentioned. For example, how do you align time series in this like multi-sensor environment? But also keep in mind, this is the technical validation study, and for the algorithm implementation, we had to tune parameters. Like we had to take data outside the technical validation, publish data, and harmonize it to actually train our algorithms, and that is an important piece. I'll come to that in a minute. So the impact of these outputs, they're multifaceted. I think we're really influencing how mobility is measured now and in the future. There will be a huge impact, I think, on research and tech companies. The data availability, our benchmarking framework, and the algorithms, and the data together, as I just explained, they enable algorithm development. And I think they also enable a fair competition between research groups and tech companies. And for pharma companies, and not only for pharma companies, I think this device-agnostic validation is important. We are not linked to one system. We're not bound to one system anymore, not even to one wearing modality. Andrea showed that we had like the feet and the center of mass and the wrist, although here we really clearly, our results are clearly are for the center of mass, right? And for health authorities, it's very important because the technical validation is the foundation for our qualification, right? We have to show that that what we measure is actually what we want to measure, and it works with a certain error, of course, right? And I think the future is bright, at least for mobility. We are enabling and de-risking clinical studies, essentially. I'm from a pharmaceutical company, and it's always kind of difficult to deal with the clinical trial teams. They are very, very conservative usually. It's a huge investment for them to implement a new endpoint. And I think with the technical validation later on, we hear about the clinical validation, we show what we can actually measure and what we can't measure, where it actually makes sense. And we need these clinical studies to continue our interaction with the health authorities, because they want to see whether we can measure treatment effects with these new digital mobility outcomes. And I mentioned the data standardization. I think this is important, as if you think about non-standardized data at the moment, mobility studies are scattered in publications. You want to pull this together, you make a meta-analysis. That's mainly qualitative analysis. So in future, it would be really great if we can become a little bit more quantitative and analyze huge mobility databases and build these databases and analyze these mobility databases together in a huge meta-analysis, for example. The TVS data and benchmarking framework not only allows the development of new algorithms, but also to explore new digital mobility outcomes, something that we may not have thought about here, but something that you can derive from the signal. And last but not least, about 100 young researchers who made the TVS happen, right? They're pursuing a career now in industry, in academia, in the hospitals, and hopefully, and I think so, I'm convinced, guys, that you're going to broadcast modern concepts of mobility and into clinical practice. I think that's a very bright perspective. I like to say that next is then the clinical validation. So we're taking our technically validated digital mobility outcomes and put them into a clinical study, or in other words, we have now validated Andreas' turntable, and we go into patients and evaluate how these DMOs work in the clinical trial setting. Thank you.